All right. Hey guys, so I'm with Mark Jones and Anna Jones. Are you married?
Anna Martins. We are married. I didn't take the name.
Okay. Thanks for Anna Martins. Okay. Um, so you guys are the founders of Pantree, based out of UK. Can you quickly summarize what Pantree is in a nutshell?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark and I started Pantry just under 3 years ago. We are essentially providing convenience for residents of upmarket residential buildings across London and more recently throughout other cities in the UK as well. What we have is a self-service 24/7 micro market solution for the residents of these buildings whereby they can just go downstairs and just grab their everyday grocery items, anything from eggs, bread, drinks, ice cream, treats, at any time of the day and night, and just serve themselves, pay for it without any kind of assistance from a shop attendant, and then just go back to their flat. So it's this kind of ultra convenient option, an alternative to, say, quick commerce delivery or a late night trip to the supermarket.
So when I started researching Pantry, I thought about the Amazon supermarket solution. I think they have a couple of stores in San Francisco where people just walk in and out. Um, but yours is not like that because people actually are trusted to grab something and pay for it with nobody watching. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, actually, we nowadays we have a broader range of options for different buildings, and so we do have some higher tech solutions for buildings that want to go down that route. But fundamentally, our core offering is exactly as you say. We call it an honesty market, and it's one where it really is based around that element of trust.
So I was excited to talk to you too because this is quite revolutionary. I mean, it shouldn't be revolutionary because we should be able to trust each other. And I remember being in Mexico and like getting tacos in some small village, and the woman would have like a jar, and you pay whatever you want for the tacos, and nobody was taking advantage of the poor woman making tacos. Everybody was putting something in a jar. So is this business based on the premise that humans are inherently good?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. It's one where I think when we started out, that was probably the biggest emotional hurdle for us to get past ourselves in terms of taking the risk of we didn't know whether it was going to work. But it very much does live or die by that premise of, people, particularly when they're in their own home, can be trusted to do the right thing.
Okay, so that's kind of a keyword when in their own home. And so it's kind of like because no one's gonna steal in front of their neighbors. Or I mean, I'm just curious how much thought you put into this whole thing, or was it just a leap of faith that people are going to go by this honesty system?
There was definitely a big leap of faith there, and full credit to our initial partners on the building side because they were taking a risk as well. You know, financially we were the ones taking the risk of the products, but that would be a real headache for the building if it hadn't worked out. I think it's something where there was a leap of faith there, but equally a lot of the thought that we put in those early stages was around how can we design this as a solution so that emotionally it helps guide to people towards that right decision. So that means designing the actual build of the market itself so that it was built in a really attractive way, that clearly a lot of care and respect had been gone into that. That meant looking at the signage all around the market so that we could really emphasize the fact that it was me and Anna and our dog, and it was a real family business. And yeah, those are the sorts of things that we've always found move the dial a lot more than just having a CCTV camera. Of course, we do have those sort of kind of deterrents as well, but the more that we can make residents feel like this is something which is truly kind of bespoke to their home, the more we find that makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. So can you just share for anyone who's gonna tune in on this and they're not familiar with Pantry, can you just share how the service works? I've never seen it in the US. I've never seen it in Asia. It's quite unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically have a central distribution warehouse in London. We have a team of drivers who then service the buildings from that central warehouse. They go to the buildings every day. They put new things on the shelves. We look at a lot of data of, what people are looking for, what people are consuming, what seasonal items we should be stocking those markets with. And then our drivers go and stock the pantries every single day. Well, from a customer perspective, it's very important to kind of always have those core items that people really have come to rely on us for, things such as their milk, that they consistently buy from us and nowhere else. So we are very focused on providing those consistent options for people on a day-to-day basis. And then from a customer perspective, they just go downstairs, they grab what they need, they scan those items very similarly to a supermarket self-checkout, and they pay for them and they walk away.
Why not? Okay, so that sounds simple enough. Why don't these customers just walk down the street to the convenience store? Why do they prefer to grab it from the downstairs pantry?
That's a great question. I think there's a mix of things there. Number one is, of course, the convenience aspect, right? That is the most attractive USP that we have, is the fact that you can just go downstairs and you don't need to go outside. It might be late, it might be raining, it might be cold, you might be tired, hungover, whatever your reason is, it's always the best thing to just be able to grab what you need within, one lift's distance from where you're living. So that's number one. But also there are a few other things, such as our selection. There are a lot of products that we carry that you can't really find in the supermarket, such as, for example, local unhomogenized milk that is a super special milk that you wouldn't be able to get at the local supermarket chain most of the time. And very bespoke products that we really curate for that audience and that, make us that little bit extra special. And then I think the third one is really people seeing how much we also care about maintaining that store and therefore wanting to support us when they are making that very straightforward choice, or, oh, do I go to the big supermarket or do I support, the business that's really catering to my building and to my community over here, and they really enjoy that aspect of it too. So it's a combination of factors that I think creates a really loyal and great customer base for us.
I think one of the things that we found most effective is the fact that because each pantry market is serving a singular building with a very static customer base with, a very specific set of circumstances that we can learn and understand, that allows us to personalize the product selection to what that building needs their pantry to be. And so you might take two different buildings, which might be in a relatively similar area of the same city, but if one of them is further away from a local shop, well, that product selection is going to feel more like a local supermarket, whereas another one perhaps has a shop 20 seconds away. Well, actually, we can personalize the product selection there to be more interesting items, more artisan items, stuff that we know they're not going to find in that supermarket. We even look at stuff like the resident demographics of that building. So what are the international cohorts within that building, and how can we make sure the product selection speaks to them needs most?
So how many pantries do you have open right now?
Good question. One we should know off the top of our head. I believe it's 29.
30th this week?
30th this week. There you go.
Okay, wow, congratulations, number 30. You should celebrate for that. And they're all kind of bespoke markets serving those specific buildings?
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, that sounds like a logistical nightmare. How are you able to, from an operational standpoint, make it custom per building?
Yeah, it was a challenge at first, but also a smaller scale challenge because obviously we were still young and didn't have this many stores. But a challenge that we learned that the best way to overcome was just through data and really good, reliable data on sales. And that those analytics are now basically doing most of the heavy lifting for us. We can very easily and very clearly see what sells and what the demands are of those stores, and that kind of gets fed into what we then allocate to each of the points of sale. And we say all of this about the curation and about the personalized aspect of it. But the truth is, that curation that moves the dial is about 20% of what we sell. 80% of what we sell is core. And so there's always that 80% that really is important for everyone. It's your milk, it's your eggs, it's your bread, it's your ice cream. Everybody wants those things, right? And then
Diet Coke.
Diet Coke. And then we get those last 20% that really change the experience from a customer perspective. But it's not as if, all of the SKUs that we carry are having to be handpicked for that particular building, because we have a core base that must be there so that we can service those everyday convenience needs for everybody.
Okay, and one of the things I noticed from your Instagram is that you actually do have those quite, I guess they're not those mainstream snacks. I mean, it looks like snacks that are almost homemade, and maybe the neighbors packaging them. And why don't you just sell Doritos and Snickers and Colgate toothpaste, and and then scale up to 1,000 stores? Why are you going in this kind of like custom bespoke market?
So I think a couple of reasons. One, I would say, uh, our Instagram gives a very fair reflection of our product selection, but equally, there's an element of it which you're not going to put onto Instagram. The Doritos, the Coke, the Red Bull, etc. Those are products which we stock because people love them and people want them. And one of the things that I think we've got better and better at over the years is being able to strike that balance between the two. The other aspect of it, I would say, is that the buildings that we're going into are super premium buildings. And the nature of these markets is that the location that we are aiming to put them within these buildings is front and center. You go to a lot of the most high-end buildings in London, you walk through the doors and the first thing you see is a Pantree. And so from a building perspective and being able to strike partnerships with the sort of organizations we have, we need to make sure that this is something that really feels and complements the level of lobby that they want to curate.
And I think one thing that I would add to that is that there's a difference between the items that we stock because we know that we must, and the items that we want to showcase. So the items that we stock will, of course, include the Doritos and the Snickers and the Coca-Colas, but we want to showcase local artisan products. We want to put them front and center because those are the ones that we believe kind of create that moat and create that a homely community experience for us. So it's not that we don't stock what everybody wants, we stock all of that, but we want to showcase and we want to also give a voice to the smaller suppliers, to the independent small businesses who are making fantastic products out there and perhaps haven't made it to the retail shelves just yet. So we love being the platform that they can use to get their products out there into mainstream customers.
And there have been a number of brands who over these 3 years, we've been able to be a real key part of their journey, who nowadays are in retailers, who are on kind of, selling in completely different scale to when we first started working with them. And they actually found that we were able to be a real key part of their journey because we were that stepping stone from kind of being in very small independent shops. Their journey to getting on those retailer shelves, we were a key part in that, both in terms of finding new customers, but also us being able to give them the data they needed to go and prove to the retailers that they had that potential.
And I think it's a really great brand premium when your like brand of cookies appears in the most high-end apartments in London. So there's an association with, good taste and high quality right off the bat, right?
Exactly. And over time we've also started to think a bit more widely about what our customer base is. So, we are moving away from only high-end offerings, and we are more and more going to more kind of mainstream buildings or potentially up and coming areas where there's a real need for the service that we provide. And that kind of curation also gets really rejigged around what the offering needs to be for these kind of different propositions of buildings, of complexes that are coming about. So we now have a much more diverse offering, I would say, than that initial premium offering that we had when we first started, and that we were kind of targeting solely when we first started. So today it's a lot more broad, and a lot more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a well-known strategy to start out high end and then the service
Exactly.
in the middle rather than the other way around. So,
Exactly that.
yeah, cool. So it's very well thought out. It's not an accident how you guys are working. Um, I would love to know your origin story. I mean, is there a story where like you guys met at the grocery store packing groceries and then you had this idea to start this business, or is it something totally different off the wall?
There you go.
Okay. Um, no, so we met at a hip hop club 10 years ago, so I'm afraid it's got nothing to do with the grocery store. We came back from Brazil where we got married straight into COVID. We got married on the 7th of March 2020. So was that very last party before the pandemic. And we were locked in, and it was a period of a lot of reflection for us, honestly, in terms of kind of the path that we wanted to take with our lives and what we wanted to do. We were both quite dismotivated by our jobs. We thought that they had been great up until that point in terms of how much it allowed us to learn and to really get exposed to different industries and environments. I was in finance for 7 years. Mark was in private equity and then startups as well. And we really felt the urge to do something of our own, and to build something for ourselves. It had been something that we had talked about for a while, but I think that COVID push was what we needed to really get it off the ground. So we quit our jobs and we brainstormed a lot about what it is that we wanted to do. We were both very passionate about food, and so we knew that we wanted to do something within that kind of segment. And we first actually started Pantree with an online marketplace for artisan businesses to sell their products with. But we quickly realized that the amount of cash that we would need to get that off the ground and to really build an online presence was not only huge, but also there was a huge chance of it not working out because of the competition landscape out there. And we didn't really see the promise. So after 6 months of being live with that online marketplace, we looked at each other. We were like, we don't think that this has legs. This isn't working out. And we had a pretty serious chat about it. We were like, right, it's time to go back to the drawing board and think of what we're gonna do. And then we started looking at what our customers were, and we thought, there's something really interesting here. We have a huge concentration of customers in these kind of little broccolis of London, these little residential areas, developed residential areas. Is there a way that we can target those customers with a different proposition, something that's interesting, something that's innovative? And we knew that the micro market model had appeared in Brazil during COVID and had
And it
been
was
quite
Brazilian.
successful.
We should add in.
That's right, I'm Brazilian. And it had been quite successful in Brazil. It was still very much in the early days, but my mom had one in her building and she was raving about it. And we thought, is there something that we can do along those lines that could be servicing this population? And that's how we came up with what Pantree then became. And we went out to raise some money to get it off the ground. We got a few contracts under our belt to go and raise that money with some real estate developers, and then that's how we got started.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was a period in time when the quick commerce boom was kind of right at its height, and where clearly there was a consumer appetite for that level of,
Convenience, yeah.
convenience. But equally, us, like pretty much anyone from the outside looking at quick commerce, it was so clearly a deeply inefficient business model and something where it didn't feel like the right solution for that. And so I think one of the things that really appealed to us when we started looking into this kind of residential micro market concept was that opportunity to service that desire for convenience, but in a way that, whether it's environmentally, on a business sustainability level, whichever way you look at it, a much more thought out and sustainable model.
And so, just to take a step back, I heard Anna say your mom had one in her building, like a micro market?
That's right. That's right. It was quite different from what we do. It was a very what they have there. It's a very kind of small but focused offering of basics, pure essentials, and very much akin to kind of an off license or a convenience store with maybe 50 SKUs. So it's quite a small offering, but it's something that really helped her get through this COVID period because she wasn't having to go to the shop for her basic needs every single day. And she loved it, and she was raving about it, and she kind of gave us the inspiration to go and run with that idea. So it was yeah, really interesting.
But I think definitely one of the things that we have found from our experience is that the key moment for us, although the first kind of iteration of Pantree's business model with the online marketplace, didn't end up being the right one of the key things for us was just to get started. And I think if we hadn't had that first experience, if we hadn't had that momentum of starting something, I'm not sure we would have landed upon what has ended up being the right model for us.
Absolutely.
So was the key moment when you realized there's a micro market in the lobby of the apartment, or was it because there was nobody manning, like no one collecting cash and it was all on the honor system?
Um, I think it was realizing that that offering was an option. That it was possible to do something to serve that kind of community, residential community, which hadn't been thought of beyond retail.
And when you approached investors, I saw you got something like 700K seed offering. What were those meetings like? I mean, did people think you were crazy? Because when I describe this business, it does seem kind of crazy for a lot of markets where, people have to worry about theft. Especially I'm thinking about the US and a lot of places.
Yeah, that's the number one question that we get until today. You know, every time that we talk about our business, that's the first thing that everybody wants to hear and drill us on. But we've kind of come to accept that that's a curiosity for most and something that needs to be proved out in order for us to show that this model can actually work. And we have proved it now. And so that's great to have those data points. When we got started and we were having those conversations with investors, we didn't have this data point. We didn't have a way to show, hey, look, we've tested this out. We've got, a few tens of thousands of customers that have gone through us, and this works. We can show and demonstrate that it's a sustainable model. We didn't have it. And so it was important for us at the time to really convey what we were looking to achieve, and to also show that we were keen to make it work even if the first iteration didn't, right? So there are lots of levers that you can pull to really deal with that number one issue if the core premise isn't what you think it's going to be, but it ended up that it really was, and it was what we envisaged it.
I think thinking back to that fundraising period, in truth, I would say that the honesty theft conversation probably wasn't the biggest challenge we found. It's one that naturally people had questions about, but I think people found it quite easy to get past that, particularly when you then look at the upside from an investor point that brings, because you have no staff on site, you have the fact that it's running 24/7. There are lots of really valuable reasons upside there. I would say that the bigger challenge we faced during that initial fundraising period was the fact that it was a business that sat between retail and tech, and that a lot of the tech investors, it was, they weren't used to going into a business that was that retail heavy and
Logistics
heavy. And for a lot of the retail investors, well, truthfully, there isn't a natural kind of investor landscape for early stage retail businesses. And so I think that was far bigger challenge that we faced. And, we were fortunate in that we were able to find a group of investors, a mixture of kind of angels and institutional VCs who kind of had the vision to see past that and to see kind of why this was a really attractive model. But that when, we had the standard investor journey of speaking to, 100 times more investors than we ended up actually putting money in. And the ones who were saying it wasn't right for them, that's what we heard the most, I'd say. And then there was one who said they didn't want to invest in a married couple.
Yes, there was. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think pros and cons to working with your spouse. For me, I think that would be like my ideal situation, when I get married, is bring her into the business. But um yeah, that's really interesting because it's not what I was expecting. And I just have to ask this question. It might be a silly question, but how much of the products get stolen?
Our theft rate is not something that we disclose publicly, but it's very manageable.
Okay, okay.
It's also something where it's less than a local supermarket,
Yes.
Oh, wow.
which is kind of the key metric for us.
Yeah, that's
So
how we base
substantially.
ourselves. Yeah, we always aim to be below mainstream retail in terms of theft rate. Otherwise, there's something that we need to revisit. If a particular store kind of breaches that threshold, then we need to rethink our strategy and if there's anything else that we can do to kind of contain that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating social experiment and
Yes.
and the business at the same time. Um, I just have a couple more questions. I saw a lot of like in the website and in the marketing about community building and this term. How does how are you building communities with this business? Where I always thought that when you go to the local convenience store and you chat with, the old lady behind the counter, and she knows your name. I mean, that's kind of like a traditional community building aspect of the convenience store. But here you remove that. So how does your community building work with Pantry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I would actually touch on to start answering that is, and truthfully, this has been a bit of a surprise to us, but when we look at our data and when we speak to residents and when we speak to buildings, the main thing that we are replacing is not the local community store. The main use case that we're replacing by far is quick commerce. And part of why buildings have really fallen in love with us is that it drastically reduces the number of delivery drivers they have waiting in their lobby the whole time for people to come down and pick up. Um, so there's that aspect of it, which I think is interesting to start off with, because that's not one that we expected going into this. But in terms of the community building side, from the experience of knowing so many people who live in these sorts of kind of high-rise buildings, whether it's Anna's family, whether it's friends and family of ours in London, they can be quite isolating places. You are living alongside some of our buildings up to almost 2,000 people in a single tower, but that doesn't mean that you're actually part of a wider community. Now, we're not going to sit here and pretend like having a shared store in the lobby completely transforms that whole experience, but it does. We've been told by residents, by buildings, that it does form quite a meaningful place where you do just get to interact with your neighbours. You take that out of it and you have maybe an awkward lift journey. You have, in a gym waiting for someone to be done with their machine. Actually, when we actually look at the way that people interact with each other in the pantry, particularly in sort of peak hours, you might have 3 or 4 people using that at once. You do see genuinely nice exchanges where if there's a new product on the shelf, people are really excited about that and talking about it. Or
Coming out in their slippers.
yeah, coming out.
We've seen a lot of slippers.
We've seen an awful lot of slippers down the years. It's these sorts of mini interactions that help you build that sense of a place that feels like your home. Even something tiny like we put in each and every pantry has its own suggestion box, and that's a digital thing. It's a QR code that links to a form, etc. But that's personalized to that building, and so each building gets us to tell us what they want their pantry to be. And so we've had instances where an Australian resident has moved into a building and become obsessed with trying to get us to stock Tim Tam biscuits, which every Australian is obsessed with them. Every British person says they are basically a penguin bar. But this resident ended up speaking to a load of their neighbours and getting their neighbours to put in into the suggestion box requests for this Tim Tam biscuit. And when it then got stocked, they made sure their neighbors were buying it so that, we had the incentive to restock it. These sorts of stories, that's what a big part of what community is at the end of it, is people interacting together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I grew up in South America, and so I know how people chat in the convenience stores. Everyone talks to everyone. It seems like you brought a little piece of that culture to, this part of the world, which is awesome. And whenever people like from Europe or the US visit Latin America, I think they're all impressed by how there's a community in every bus stop or every supermarket. It just people just talk to each other. So it sounds like that's a kind of a piece of Latin culture that you guys have brought over. I don't know if that's overthinking or not into it, but since Anna's Brazilian, it just seemed like fitting. Um, that's really cool. So what's the future of Pantree and where are you guys going in the next, let's say, 1 to 5 to 10 years?
Can we take that?
Yeah, you take it.
So I think one of the things that we are kind of really excited about at the moment is broadening out from London. It's something where the key to that has been us launching a kind of additional operating model, which we call Pantree Copilot. As you can imagine, that core operational model of us visiting each building 5, 6, 7 times a week is very operationally intensive. And to go and open up to new cities, new regions would require establishing a whole new operational presence in there, new warehouses, vans, drivers, etc. But we were finding, and that's something we're interested in doing, but obviously, there are barriers to that, there are hurdles to that, financial as much as anything. But we were finding an awful lot of buildings from outside London reaching out to us. They'd seen it in buildings, they'd heard about it, they really wanted it. And so we really approached things as how can we provide the same experience from a resident perspective whilst becoming almost overnight agnostic in terms of region, at least within the UK. And so that's where Pantree Copilot came from. In a nutshell, it is something closer to a franchise model where we run the market alongside the building itself. And that's allowed us to now be in a place where any building from the UK can approach us, be keen on this, and we can say yes if it's the right fit. And so in the last year, we've now opened up in, I think, 5 more cities in the UK, and that right now is a big area of our focus, is really consolidating that position that we have within the UK to be the people for residential micromarkets.
So can you quickly go over the business model of Pantree versus Pantree Copilot?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only difference really is how the day-to-day servicing of those markets work. Our work is the same for both of them, and the amount of care that we put into how those markets are stocked and how they are frankly servicing those communities is the same across both. The difference is just that operationally we deliver the goods, but we are not stocking them ourselves. We partner with the building's management so that the building can actually do the day-to-day stocking with the shelves. So they provide us with that kind of service because they can see how much valuable having a pantry in their buildings is for their residents. And so we kind of work alongside the buildings, whereas for most of the buildings that we do in London, the building doesn't really get involved in the stock, in the day-to-day stocking.
Okay, so yeah, this is a way to, I guess, expand without running out of operational resources, I'm guessing.
Exactly. I mean, to be honest, it would never really be possible to expand to most of the cities in the UK that we are expanding to were we to have to replicate the London model, because in order for us to reach profitability with our current model in London, given the logistical costs of actually servicing those markets, you need to have a high concentration of buildings in a particular region to do that. So a lot of these cities that we're now expanding to are quite remote locations where there isn't a high concentration of buildings. So it would never make sense for us to set up shop in those cities. And so this is a way that we can actually service them at a really high standard, whereas otherwise, irrespective of how much we grew or how much money we would have, we wouldn't be able to service them in the first place, because there just aren't enough buildings within that radius to make the model make sense. In this way, we can expand to all of the regions, and suddenly the market is a really big one and super attractive as well.
Cool. And I want to leave off with one last question. What have you guys learned about this push for real kind of face-to-face experiences, getting off the smartphone, getting off the screens? I mean, it seems like every business should have been an online business that, gets investment, and every new company is another tech company that's, another online platform. But you guys have flipped that model completely on its head and making this kind of community market. Do you think there's room for other business models where people actually show up and grab stuff off the shelf in different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like there's a little bit of a counterculture happening at the moment in terms of people really trying to think outside of the box and how they are promoting social experiences, and those not being exclusively online. I think people are wanting to get out there, to meet more people, to form real life bonds, and we can see a lot of startups that are arising in that same kind of headspace as we are in, and it's super exciting. It's a great time to be in this market. It's a great time to be kind of combining all of the technology that is available to us, which gives us the data and the analytics that we need to continue to thrive and to continue to serve those communities well, but also being mindful of kind of bringing people back to the real world, and a little bit more personal in how we're approaching our business.
I think certainly for us, one of the nicest things about this, particularly having had an initial experience and the very first iteration of Pantree being a lot more kind of online, is very quickly when we launched this version of Pantree 3 years ago, it really mattered to us that it was tangible. It's something that we could actually go and visit and touch. And, even to this day, it's something where you and I, make sure that on that monthly basis, we are getting out to our stores and we are kind of really interacting with them in that physical sense.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. It's a really interesting story, a really unique business. Wish you guys continued success, and definitely hope we can follow up on the Pantree story in some time. And yep, thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Take care.
Okay, bye.